In October 2024, a routine review of a Victorian-era photograph led to one of the most unexpected findings in the study of women's history in 19th century America. What started as an ordinary cataloging job at a Boston auction house slowly turned into an investigation that lasted 4 months, crossed 3 states, and finally uncovered a forgotten network of bravery that had remained hidden in plain sight for more than 137 years. The photograph had survived for over a century, stored away in the attic of an old textile mill owner's mansion in Lowell, Massachusetts. When the estate was finally settled after years of legal battles, its belongings were divided among different auction houses and antique dealers across New England. Among hundreds of objects was a single framed family portrait dated 1887. At first look, it seemed completely ordinary. 7 people stood and sat in formal Victorian clothing, their expressions serious and still, just as people posed in that era. Dr. Emily Richardson, a curator at the Massachusetts Historical Society who specialized in 19th century social records, had examined thousands of similar photographs during her 15-year career. Studio portraits from the 1880s followed strict rules, fixed poses, careful placement of family members by status, and a strong sense of formality. On that rainy afternoon, while preparing items for an upcoming exhibition, Richardson nearly cataloged the photograph without any extra thought. But something made her stop. It might have been the strange placement of one woman's hand, or the way the light revealed a small detail. Richardson picked up her magnifying loupe and leaned closer. What she noticed made her heart beat faster. The woman seated on the left, appearing to be in her mid-30s, with dark hair and a high-collared dress, had positioned her left hand in a way that looked uncomfortable, almost unnatural for a formal portrait. Her hand rested on her lap, but 3 fingers were extended in a careful and exact shape, while the thumb and index finger touched at their tips, forming what looked like a planned symbol. Richardson caught her breath. In all her years of studying Victorian photography, she had never seen such a gesture in a formal family portrait. These photographs were carefully planned and costly events. Every detail was controlled on purpose. Random hand positions did not simply happen. If this gesture appeared in the image, it had to mean something. It was a deliberate message, frozen in time, waiting for someone to notice. Richardson spent the rest of that afternoon recording every detail of the photograph. The back of the frame offered the first clues. A small paper label, yellowed and partly torn, showed the printed words Whitmore Studio, Lowell, Mass. 1887 in elegant Victorian lettering. Written below in faded ink were the words The Harrison Family. With this information, Richardson began investigating who these people were and what the mysterious hand sign could mean. The next morning, she traveled to the Lowell Historical Society, a small brick building that held city records, business listings, and detailed documents about the textile industry that had shaped the region throughout the 19th century. Within a few hours, Richardson identified the family. Thomas Harrison appeared in the 1887 Lowell City Directory as the owner of a modestly successful dry goods store on Merrimack Street. Census records from 1880 listed him, his wife Catherine, and their 3 children. The household also included Catherine's unmarried sister, recorded as Eleanor Parker, age 34. Richardson's pulse quickened as she compared the photograph with the census information. The woman with the unusual hand gesture matched the age and description of Eleanor Parker, but the census revealed another interesting detail. Eleanor was not listed as keeping house, which was common for unmarried women at the time. Instead, her occupation was recorded as seamstress. This detail mattered. In the 1880s, seamstresses often worked in the large textile mills that employed thousands of workers, many of them young women from farming families or recent immigrants searching for independence. Richardson requested access to employment records from the Boot Cotton Mills and the Lawrence Manufacturing Company, 2 of Lowell's largest textile operations of that era. What she found showed a harsh picture of industrial life in the 1880s. Workdays lasted 12 to 14 hours. Conditions were unsafe. Wages were barely enough to live on, and workers, especially women, had almost no legal protection. Accidents happened often. Sickness spread easily, and anyone who complained risked being fired immediately. Yet Eleanor Parker's name did not appear in the mill employment records. Instead, Richardson uncovered something far more interesting. Eleanor was listed in the records of St. Anne's Episcopal Church as a visiting nurse who provided care to workers' families. This position would have allowed her to enter many homes, gain deep knowledge of families in crisis, and move freely in ways that were unusual for women at the time. The pieces were starting to come together, but Richardson still did not understand the meaning of the hand gesture. The breakthrough came from an unexpected place. While researching women's organizations and charitable groups from the Victorian era, Richardson found a brief mention in a scholarly article about women's reform movements in industrial cities. Published in 1998, the article noted that some women's aid societies in the 1880s developed secret signaling methods to identify safe houses and trusted people without drawing attention from hostile authorities or abusive family members. The article referred to a collection of personal letters stored at the Schlesinger Library at Harvard University. Richardson contacted the library at once and arranged to review the collection. 3 days later, she sat in the climate-controlled reading room, carefully turning the fragile pages of letters exchanged between women involved in what they called protective work. This work focused on helping women and children escape dangerous homes and harsh labor conditions. One letter, dated March 1886, and written by a woman named Harriet from Lawrence, Massachusetts, included a rough drawing in the margin. It showed a hand with 3 fingers extended, and the thumb and index finger touching, exactly matching the gesture seen in Eleanor Parker's photograph. Beneath the sketch, Harriet had written, "Remember our sign, 3 for the Trinity of safety, shelter, sustenance, and secrecy. The circle means our network is unbroken. Show this to any woman in need, and she will know you are a friend." Richardson leaned back in her chair, her thoughts racing. This was not a random pose or a strange photographic accident. Eleanor Parker had intentionally placed a coded message into her family portrait. It identified her as part of a hidden network devoted to helping vulnerable women and children. The fact that she managed to include this symbol in a formal studio portrait paid for by her brother-in-law was both bold and clever. But it also raised a serious question. Why take such a risk? Family portraits were expensive and meant to be displayed openly in homes, seen by visitors and neighbors. If the wrong person recognized the sign, Eleanor could have faced serious punishment. Victorian society did not support women who challenged family authority or helped wives leave their husbands, no matter the reason. Richardson needed to learn more about Eleanor Parker herself, who she was, how she became involved in this work, and what dangers she faced. She returned to Lowell and began searching for personal records that could reveal more about Eleanor's life and motives. Church records, property deeds, newspapers, and court files slowly formed a clearer picture. Eleanor Parker was born in 1853 in rural New Hampshire, the youngest of 5 children in a farming family. At 19, she briefly married a man named David. Court records from Hillsborough County showed that the marriage ended after only 18 months. The entry was short but meaningful. It stated that separation was granted due to cruel treatment. In the 1870s, divorce or separation was rare and deeply shameful. The fact that Eleanor succeeded in gaining a legal separation suggested the abuse had been severe and well documented. This part of her past likely explained her dedication to helping other women in similar situations. After the separation, Eleanor moved to Lowell to live with her sister Catherine and her brother-in-law Thomas. There, she trained as a nurse through a program run by St. Anne's Episcopal Church, part of a growing effort to bring basic medical care to industrial workers and their families. By 1880, Eleanor was regularly visiting tenements and boarding houses throughout Lowell's Mill District. Richardson found her mentioned in church meeting notes and local newspapers from the 1880s. She was praised for her charity work among poor families and described as devoted to Christian service. But when Richardson compared these public records with other documents, a deeper story appeared. These approved activities seemed to hide more controversial efforts, helping women and children escape violent homes and unfair employers. Ella Laner's role as a visiting nurse was the perfect cover in the 1880s. Such nurses traveled into working-class neighborhoods, immigrant tenements, and mill boarding houses, offering simple medical care to families who could not afford doctors. This gave Ella Laner access to the most vulnerable people in Lowell, families dealing with illness, injury, unemployment, and the daily struggles of industrial life. She saw the damage that 12-hour workdays in dangerous factories did to women's bodies. She saw children working in mills instead of attending school. She encountered women trapped in marriages where violence was treated as a private issue beyond the law's concern. Richardson noticed that Ella Laner's nursing visits often lasted longer than necessary and that she returned to the same homes again and again. This suggested more than basic medical care. She was building trust, forming bonds, and quietly offering help to women who had no other support. With Ella Laner Parker's name and the meaning of the hand gesture now known, Richardson expanded her search beyond Lowell. She contacted archives, historical societies, and university libraries across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and New Hampshire, asking them to look for photographs from the 1880s and 1890s that might show the same gesture or a similar one. Within weeks, replies began to arrive, and the results were striking. A small museum in Providence held a cabinet card from 1889, showing 3 women at a church event, one of them subtly displaying the same 3-finger sign. The New Hampshire Historical Society found a family portrait from 1891, where an elderly woman's hand formed a similar shape. The American Textile History Museum in Lowell had an 1888 photograph of workers standing outside a mill, and when Richardson studied it closely, she noticed 2 women in the back row holding their hands in the familiar pattern. Each new discovery led to more questions and deeper research. Richardson began creating a database, recording the names, places, jobs, and family ties of these women. A clear pattern emerged, both powerful and heartbreaking. Nearly all of the women were linked to industrial labor as seamstresses, mill workers, domestic servants, or laborers. Many were unmarried, widowed, or separated from their husbands, like Ella Laner. They lived in towns and cities across New England where textile mills and related industries employed large numbers of working-class women and children. Richardson also found mentions of these women in unexpected records. Church meeting notes sometimes referred to them as providers of Christian charity to suffering families. Local newspapers from the 1880s and 1890s sometimes mentioned these women as members of temperance groups or moral reform societies, which were socially accepted ways for women to take part in public life. These roles gave them respectable identities. However, the evidence suggested that these visible activities often acted as a shield for far more sensitive and risky work behind the scenes. What made Ella Laner Parker's network unique was how organized and secretive it was. Unlike well-known reform movements, this network worked almost entirely out of sight, relying on coded signs, trusted messengers, and careful silence to avoid drawing the attention of people who would oppose them. The hand gesture and the photographs served several purposes at once. They helped members recognize one another. They recorded personal commitment for future generations. They also created a lasting record that could not easily be destroyed or denied, unlike letters or spoken stories. Richardson found proof that the network operated several safe houses in Lowell alone. These were simple homes and small apartments where women and children could stay for short periods while longer-term plans were made. The locations changed often to stay hidden, and they were supported by small donations, unpaid work, and the personal money of women who gave themselves fully to this cause. As Richardson dug deeper, she began to understand how cleverly Ella Laner and her network worked in a society that would have openly condemned them. One of the most remarkable aspects was how they hid their efforts inside perfectly respectable Victorian institutions, church groups, sewing circles, and charity societies that no one questioned too closely. Eleanor's place within her family also offered protection. As an unmarried woman living with her sister's family, she was expected to help with household duties and remain under her brother-in-law's authority. But Thomas Harrison, as Richardson learned from business records and letters, was a forward-thinking merchant who supported temperance reform and believed in education for working-class children. There was no clear proof that he knew everything Eleanor was doing, but it was clear he allowed her great freedom to continue her nursing and charitable visits. The timing of the 1887 family photograph turned out to be especially meaningful. Richardson discovered it had been taken only 3 months after a terrible fire at one of Lowell's textile mills that killed 7 workers, including 3 young women. The tragedy caused public anger and renewed demands for safer working conditions, but real change never followed. In the weeks after the fire, Eleanor and others in her network increased their efforts, helping the victims' families and assisting workers who wanted to leave the mills for safer jobs. The photograph, Richardson realized, was Eleanor's quiet act of resistance and record-keeping. Unable to speak openly about her work or defend the women she helped, she chose another way to leave proof of what she stood for. The hand gesture became her mark, her witness, preserved in an image that would survive. Long after she was gone, Richardson later learned that several other women in the network had done the same thing. They placed the coded gesture into family portraits, wedding photos, and even funeral cards. It was as if they understood that history might forget them, that their efforts could be erased or ignored, and they wanted to leave behind some sign of who they truly were and what they had done. The danger Eleanor took by placing the symbol in such a public and permanent form became clearer as Richardson uncovered evidence of resistance to women's reform work. Newspaper editorials from the time criticized women who interfered in family matters and encouraged wives to leave their homes. Court records showed cases where women who helped others escape abusive marriages were sued for breaking up families or accused of immoral behavior. The social and legal punishment could be harsh. To fully grasp the reach and impact of Eleanor's network, Richardson knew she had to look beyond photographs and official files. She began searching for personal voices, diaries, letters, and family stories that could reveal the real human experiences behind the secret signs and hidden safe houses. This led her to the descendants of women who had been helped by Eleanor and her network during the 1880s and 1890s. Using family research and help from local historical societies, Richardson found several families connected to Lowell's Mill District during that time. Many were reluctant to talk at first, especially about painful family histories or topics linked to shame and hardship, but as Richardson explained her work and showed them Eleanor Parker's photograph, some began to share stories that had been passed down quietly through generations, often only spoken in private moments or near the end of life. One woman, a retired teacher named Patricia, shared her great-great-grandmother's diary from 1889. It belonged to a mill worker named Anne, who had come to Lowell from rural Maine at the age of 16. The diary described exhausting work, long hours, and wages barely enough to cover food and rent. But one entry from November 1889 stood out. It read that she met a nurse with kind eyes who asked about her cough, but seemed to notice more. The nurse made the sign of 3 in a circle and told her she had friends if she ever needed help. Anne's diary showed that months later, after she was injured by factory machinery and faced losing her job without pay, Eleanor helped her find work as a domestic servant with a family in Worcester. There she escaped the mills and the supervisors who had pressured her for unwanted attention. Anne later married, raised children, and lived to 73, a long life compared to many mill workers who died young from injury, sickness, or exhaustion. Another family shared letters that referred to a safe house on Adam Street in Lowell, a place where women could stay when life at home became unbearable. The letters never clearly explained what happened there, but they mentioned Eleanor by name and praised her kindness and silence. Richardson traced the address and found it had belonged to a widow named Mrs. Whitman, who rented rooms to boarders but never seemed to have long-term tenants. according to city records. These personal stories revealed what Eleanor's work truly involved. Women and children who came to her were given immediate shelter and basic needs. After that, they were helped to find longer-term answers, new jobs, housing in other cities, and sometimes even legal help in the most serious cases of abuse. The network survived through trust, secrecy, and the willingness of many women to give whatever they could. Richardson also uncovered the personal cost paid by Eleanor and others in the network. Victorian society placed strict expectations on women, especially unmarried women who depended on family support. Breaking those expectations, even for moral reasons, carried serious risk. In 1892, 5 years after the family portrait, Eleanor Parker's name appeared in Lowell court records under troubling circumstances. A man named Robert sued her for interfering in his household after she helped his wife and children leave and move to Providence. In court, he claimed Eleanor had turned his wife against him and ruined his family without cause. Eleanor's testimony told another story. She described bruises she had seen during nursing visits, children who jumped at loud sounds, and a woman who feared her husband would eventually kill her. The judge dismissed the case, stating that Eleanor had acted as a concerned visiting nurse. Still, the trial was reported in local newspapers, and the attention harmed her reputation. Some church members questioned whether her work was proper for an unmarried woman, and pressure was placed on Thomas Harrison to control her activities more closely. Richardson found signs that this lawsuit forced Eleanor to become even more careful. After 1892, her name appeared less often in church and public records. She seemed to pull back from visible charity work, at least on the surface. But other sources suggested she never truly stopped. She simply learned to stay hidden. The personal sacrifices were clear in other ways as well. Eleanor never remarried and never had children. She lived her entire adult life in her sister's home, relying on her brother-in-law's support. In Victorian society, this would have been seen as failure. But Richardson understood that Eleanor made deliberate choices, giving up comfort and recognition to serve a cause she believed was more important. Other women in the network faced similar struggles. Some were cut off by family members who disapproved. Others lost jobs or housing when employers or landlords learned of their involvement. One woman Richardson identified through photographs was briefly jailed in 1894 for sheltering a fugitive wife. The charges were later dropped, but she spent 3 days in custody. These dangers were real and constant. The women in Eleanor's network lived under true legal and social threat every day. Eleanor Parker's final years formed the most moving part of Richardson's research. After the 1892 court case, Eleanor continued her work with greater care. By the late 1890s, she was in her mid-40s, and her health had begun to weaken, likely due to the physical strain of nursing and the stress of living a hidden life. In 1899, her sister Catherine died of pneumonia at 46. Records showed a short illness that worsened quickly, leaving Thomas Harrison widowed with 3 grown children. Eleanor remained in the household to manage domestic matters, as was expected. But Richardson discovered that Catherine's death affected Eleanor deep, for reasons beyond grief. Among Catherine's belongings, found during the estate settlement that uncovered the photograph, were letters Eleanor had written to her sister over many years. These letters showed that Catherine had known about the network all along and had quietly supported it. She sometimes gave money from the household budget, sometimes offered her home as a temporary refuge, and always protected Eleanor through silence. One letter from 1891 stood out. Eleanor wrote that she knew her risks affected the household and that she would leave if Thomas asked, but she could not abandon the work because she had seen too much suffering. Catherine's reply, written on the back, said that Eleanor would not leave, that her work was just, and that both she and Thomas were proud of her, even if they could never say it openly. This exchange changed Richardson's understanding of the 1887 photograph. It was not only Eleanor's personal record, it was taken with her family's knowledge and quiet approval. Thomas and Catherine allowed the gesture because they supported her mission. even if they could not admit it publicly. The photograph became both Eleanor's witness and her family's silent support. Eleanor Parker died in 1904 at the age of 51. Her death certificate listed consumption, tuberculosis, likely caught during years of nursing in crowded tenements and boarding houses. She was buried in the family plot at Lowell Cemetery. Her stone read simply, Eleanor Parker, 1853-1904. She served the suffering. In February 2025, 4 months after discovering the photograph, Dr. Emily Richardson presented her findings at the Massachusetts Historical Society. More than 200 people attended, including historians, genealogists, descendants of mill workers, and members of the public drawn to Eleanor's story. Richardson displayed the original photograph, along with dozens of others showing the same coded gesture. She shared letters, court files, and personal accounts that showed the size and impact of the network. She told the stories of women like Anne who escaped the mills, families who fled abusive homes, and many others whose names were lost but whose lives were changed. The presentation quickly attracted attention beyond academic circles. Local newspapers reported on it, followed by national media. Descendants of Lowell mill workers began coming forward with family documents and stories. Some discovered that their ancestors had been part of Eleanor's network or had been helped by it. Others found old photographs with the same hidden gesture, adding to the growing proof of how widespread the network had been. The city of Lowell, long known for honoring its industrial past, began planning an exhibition focused on Eleanor Parker and the Women's Protective Network. It would honor not only Eleanor but also the many working-class women who risked their safety and reputations to protect others. Richardson continued her research into other industrial regions and found signs of similar networks in Pennsylvania coal towns, New York garment districts, and Midwestern factories. The same hand gesture appeared in photographs from the 1880s into the early 1900s, showing that T.'s silent system of communication was far more common than anyone had realized. The 1887 Harrison family portrait, once forgotten in an attic, now hangs in the permanent collection of the Massachusetts Historical Society. Visitors stopped to study Eleanor Parker's carefully placed hand, to learn about her life, and to think about why she chose to leave such a public record despite the danger. For Richardson, the project became deeply personal. It revealed a hidden chapter of women's history, a story of courage, shared strength, and quiet resistance that challenged simple ideas about Victorian obedience and silence. Eleanor Parker and the women of her network did not wait for laws to change or for society to protect them. They built their own systems of help and survival, working in secrecy but leaving signs behind. The hand gesture in the photograph, once unnoticed, was finally seen and understood. And in that moment of recognition, Eleanor Parker's message, preserved in light and shadow for 137 years, was finally heard